The sensor setup video will provide you with the necessary steps in setting up your sensors. To get to the sensor setup page, first of all, we're going to go ahead and hit OK. Then we're going to go ahead and go into System Setup. And then we're going to go ahead and go into Sensor Setup. Now the Sensor Setup page is where you can map, calibrate, and even test sensors. The Map Sensor option is where you can set up the system according to the various sensors available. Note, in order to display a sensor reading, your sensor must be mapped first. Calibrate Sensors is where sensors can be calibrated to adjust for offsets as well as setup for software purposes. Self-test setup is where the diagnostics and testing for your digital sensor is done. Analog sensor mapping allows you to average the data from separate analog sensors. But first, let's go ahead and go into Map Sensors. And in this field, you have several different sensors that you can map. You can select from inside temperature, inside humidity, light sensor, outside temperature sensor, wind direction and speed sensor, the rain sensor, and finally, backup temperature sensor. Note that all sensors by default are disabled until you enable them or assign them to respond to software. If you're going to use an analog probe to measure the inside temperature, make sure that you assign the analog probe to be analog and then hit OK. And if you were to hit Home and save, notice that now you have a sensor reading because the analog probe is hooked up, it is now mapped, and now you have a sensor reading displayed here at the main screen. Let's go back into the sensor setup again, and let's go ahead and talk about calibration. In this section you have the raw value, the cal value, and the adjust value. The raw value is the direct reading from the sensor. The cal is the offset which will be added or subtracted to raw value to generate the adjusted value. And the adjust is the value which can be reflected on the SATA screen. Now that we have viewed the Calibrate Sensor option, let's go ahead and back out of this by hitting Cancel, and we'll go ahead and go into the Self-Test Setup. Now, on the sensor self-test, unless you are equipped with a backup sensor, this feature should be disabled. But if you have a backup sensor, this is where you would do your testing. And finally, we have analog sensor mapping. Now, if you were to go ahead and go into analog sensor mapping, this section enables the user to average the data from separate analog sensors. This is useful in situations where the user needs to take temperature data from multiple locations in a zone and then average them to form an accurate temperature reading from an entire zone. If you have two sensors installed, both analog and both on separate sides of a large greenhouse, you can obtain the overall temperature average by taking those two analog sensors, go ahead and hit back, and then you want to map the sensor, the in temp, and then you want to go ahead and scroll down for the in temp to be average. And by doing this, it will average both sensors as one temperature reading. Going back to the analog sensor mapping, save that. You would use the arrows and the wheel to navigate through this field, and you would use setup to select or deselect your options. And that's our overview of sensor setup.